Joining me now, John Whittaker, an economist who teaches at Lancaster University in the UK. Hello, thank you very much for your time. Now, if you could start off by telling us what exactly the problem is. Why was this budget plan rejected?
Well, it's going against all the principles that the Commission is working by. It's against what's known as the Stability Pact, which is supposed to set an upper limit on deficits of member countries of the Eurozone. Now, Italy's been a bit of a suspect case for a long time, and the Commission really can't afford to let Italy step out of line. They've agreed beforehand on a budget deficit of 0.8% last year, that now the Italian government has said no, they're going to go up to 2.4%, so the Commission could hardly avoid digging its heels in and say, listen, we agreed this before, now you've got to behave yourselves.
They were adamant in their defence of the plan yesterday, but they do have 3 weeks now to propose a new plan.
Yeah, you know, there's going to be a lot of negotiation back and forth between the Commission and the Italian government. I say the Commission could hardly afford to back off. Well, the Italian government can't really afford to back off either, because they have been telling their electorate right since the moment they were elected that they're going to go for fiscal expansion. And if they, at the moment the Commission says, look, you mustn't do this, if they backed off now, they would lose a terrific amount of support within Italy itself. They've got to stick with it. But what will happen now in the next 2 or 3 weeks is a load of horse trading. This is my opinion. And they'll end up with a compromise. They can't afford not to. The Commission can't afford to continue with a confrontation, because that's just going to make everybody else jittery. The yields on Italian bonds will go out even further. That means that investors are nervous and they'll start withdrawing funds, which is going to cause real trouble for Italy and its government debt.
How unusual is such a move to reject a draft budget outright? I mean, it's not like other countries haven't, they haven't always followed the rules, like France, for example.
Yeah, I think this particular move is new, but then apparently the Commission were given beefed up powers 4 or 5 years ago at the height of the financial crisis to do this sort of thing. Apparently they haven't used this technique before, but if you go really much further back, I think it was 2003 that the French and German governments outstepped their budgets. They went over the 3% at that time. That was the limit. And the Commission reprimanded them, and they told the Commission, well, this is what we're doing. So they took the countries to the European Court, and the European Court sort of fudged it and said, well, you've been naughty, don't do it again. And that was the end of that. But that was a similar kind of approach. Now the Commission has apparently got beefed up powers, but in the end they're fairly impotent, because apparently the only sanction they can apply is to fine Italy. Now, they've never fined anybody before, and it would be a pretty silly thing to do, to fine a country that's already in budget difficulties. Fine it another 0.5% of GDP, it just makes things worse. I think there's a great move to prevent this escalating. The European Union is terrified of Italy moving off, leaving the euro, and at the same time the Commission, they're all terrified, they're all frightened actually of Italy leaving the euro.
And you mentioned worrying investors. I mean, that's the thing. By wanting to make an example of Italy and not give other EU countries the wrong idea, the European Commission might actually be making things worse for Italy. That's
the problem. They might be, but I've just tried to explain why they're doing it this way, but I think they'll back off. They'll end up with a compromise. If the yield on Italian bonds goes up another couple of percentage points, then it will be very difficult for the ratings agencies to maintain their current investment grade ratings for Italy. And the government might well find that it can't borrow in the financial markets under any reasonable terms, in which case they're in real trouble. There is one other matter I might mention. They suggested, going back a few months, that they would issue their own kind of money, mini treasury bills or something, which would rather look like currency. That made people look really nervous, and the Commission hated the idea. But none of this actually helps to give confidence to the financial markets.
All right, we'll have to wait and see how things play out over the next few weeks. Thank you very much indeed for your time and your analysis. John Whittaker joining me there from Lancaster.